Welcome to Under the Hood Podcast. In this podcast, we pop the hood and give you an inside look at the hows and whys of our ministry here at Cornerstone Church. I'm Michael Nave, your host. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this episode and to welcome Nathan to the studio.
Oh, yeah.
Nathan, am I right? Are you number 3? Like on staff, Jody's the longest tenured. I'm second. You're third, right?
I think so.
Because the Thrashes have been around longer than you and me, but it was... Jason served as an elder and then came on staff, and Tad and the Anglin family were here before us, but it was later when Tad took over IT for us. Number 3, it's been a while.
Almost 14 years. Almost 14 years.
That is crazy. January of 10.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. And what makes this really special to have you sitting at the table is this long-term journey we have been on of helping people follow Jesus and even building everything we do at Cornerstone around this. And so for this episode, and what we plan to do once a month is each time we finish up a practice. Last month we finished up worship. We're gonna, I don't know, what'd you call it? Do a time capsule?
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. It's just one of those like, hey, we want to not just move past this and say that was a fun series, but we want to say, okay, what was so good about that? What did God speak to us? What were the surprises? And then what did we learn? Because this is not just something that we are, it's going to be in the past.
Yes.
It's not just October of 2023, but we're saying, hey, we want this to be significant in the life of our church moving forward.
And what the real truth is that, I am really inclined to move forward and just, hey, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen? And next year, and then the next.
I love it though. Like I love working with a visionary who has always got his eyes on the horizon. It's fun.
And then you drag me back. It's like, Michael, that's great. Okay.
Just a little bit.
So let's talk about what we would put in a time capsule. I love that metaphor. Like, what would we do there? So kind of establishing shots. We have long been a church that says, hey, we help people follow Jesus. And now this word follow has become really rich to us. Like we're now beginning to say, we want to become a follow church because this word follow encapsulates what some are calling a rule of life. Yeah. What do people mean with rule of life? That's not a phrase I formerly used.
Yeah, so it's a phrase that has like some like ancient historic meaning to it, but then like it's come in vogue more recently as well. And so Andy Crouch defines it as a set of practices to guard our habits and guides our life. Guard our habits and guide our lives. And so it's kind of just like what are our rhythms? What do we value? What do we put into practice in our daily lives? That's how I think of a rule of life. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, the other quote from Crouch is that he says, a group of people without a rule of life is not a community.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Amos 3:3. How can two walk together unless they be agreed? In some cases, you have people showing up to church, but they really don't share a rule of life, these guiding practices. And, one person thinks this about worship and another person thinks this about, a Sunday school class or a small group, and another thinks this about serving and how often. And yet when we have a rule of life, when we have follow in place, it actually makes this community where we are partnered in the same direction. Yep. And so we come to it. So I've gotten that quote has really inspired me about recognize the importance of us having that shared understanding when we show up at church.
Yeah. I even think about like in the business world, Lencioni talks about the difference between like working groups and teams.
Yes.
Like working groups are just people that get in the same room and have meetings and stuff, but teams have like shared objectives and values for what they're going after.
Yes.
And so I just love that picture for us of like what it looks like for us to even be on the same team means that we're pushing toward the same goals and objectives, have this shared set of values and rule of life.
Absolutely. Okay, so good. So follow as a rule of life, up, out, and in. Love God, love people as you love yourself. The first practice in your relationship of loving God or up is worship. So let's take a look at the time capsule. So as we think about what we did last month, working through this practice of worship, let's kind of run through the 4 weeks and maybe let's talk about some high points and some fun stories that we get to share. So week 1, we preached through First Chronicles, David bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, worship being central. That may be my favorite part of that weekend, of David saying, hey, I'm king, and the first thing I'm going to do is remind God's people that we are people of worship. Yeah. As you looked at that text, what was jumping out to you?
Yeah, I think that the priority of it is what hit me as well. It's like, hey, first thing I got to do, like my first executive order, the thing that's like first day in office, priority is let's get the presence of the Lord back into the central place in our camp.
Yes.
And I just love that. I thought it was so powerful.
And then for him to hire the professionals to do it, to say, hey, there are people gifted and called by God that inspire us to worship. And so then they invited in. And as God's people gather, worship is heard and shared by others. Like, we are better together. That was really helpful for me, of recognizing that coming together as God's people is a really important thing, and it's better when we are worshiping together.
I totally agree. Like, as a musician, I can just attest to the fact that like highly skilled musicians are just inspiring to be around and to watch and observe. And then they also just draw you in. I'm thinking about, like, I went to see Nickel Creek, one of my very favorite bluegrass bands out there in Nashville. And like, I was just sitting there, and it was kind of a transcendent moment. These guys, like, some of them are believers, some are not, but like watching this guy who is very gifted, one of the best mandolinists alive. And I'm just sitting there like talking with God about how amazing it is that this guy has this level of skill and even natural ability. How much better whenever it's used for the glory of God within the church and the way it inspires. So
absolutely. Cool. Well said. And then we moved into week 2. We had the worship panel. I am so proud of our team. You led the discussion. Walk us through what happened in that week and what you remember.
So this was a surprise highlight for me of the series, because I can be a little bit like, I think there was 2 things going on. I can be a little bit old school. So whenever it's like a service that doesn't have a sermon, I'm like, ooh, is this going to, because I just love good Bible teaching. And so I was, on the front end, slightly skeptical there.
Yes.
And then also I like to script things out beforehand and know exactly what we're going to say. Even whenever I like prep a sermon, I manuscript everything, like what I'm going to, the very phrases I'm going to use and stuff. And so going into it without it being a sermon, being a panel discussion, and then us not having scripts, but just bullet points, I was a little nervy, but then like I remember some specific points in that week where I just felt God speaking to me like,
He did.
Hey, I've got this. You can trust Dustin. You can trust this team that's up here. This is going to be good. And on Friday night, just sitting there with that panel of residents and worship leadership on our staff, I was just blown away by how rich and solid and helpful the things were that they all had to say. So it was a surprise highlight for me.
It really was special. I was so proud of our team in walking us through what we experienced in public worship, and then the why, and heard many stories. We'll get to a few of those in a moment, but of people that it really helped them engage in public worship and even overcome some inhibitions and some walls that they had in the past. So week 2 was the worship panel. Then week 3, we stepped into that story of the woman at the well. The hour is coming. It's not going to be your mountain or mine. Remembering that God ripped the temple veil top to bottom. We are not bound by 2705 Walton Way. We are able to worship in spirit and in truth. And I love I love Dustin's phrase from that week of study: no flesh, no lies, recognizing in spirit that my flesh is weak, and I've got to recognize that to be able to worship in spirit, and no lies. It must be based in the gospel, in Jesus, that we are actually able to worship. Week 3 was really special.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd never before seen those 2 categories in that text specifically. Like, I think seeing the way that Jesus addressed that was just really powerful.
in the past for me, resonating with what you're saying, is it just sounded like kind of a nice little phrase,
Right?
Spirit and truth.
Right.
And then to actually dig into that and connect those pieces was really helpful.
Yeah.
Which then brings us to week 4, that Colossians 3 text.
Yeah.
Wow, what a really special weekend. And in the past, I knew the Greek words for worship, proskuneo and lutreo, and that bow down and also worship as service. But I had not seen before where what we do in the worship center on a weekend then extends into our week in the roles that we play. That was really special for me.
It was a cool connection. Yeah, I love that.
And then just 3:16, like Colossians 3:16, not just John 3:16. Yes. Here's another good 3:16.
Another good 3:16. Wow, there's a lot of good 3:16s. So this, as a guy who loves solid Bible teaching, this might the surprise highlight for me was week 2, but week 4 is just like one of my favorite texts around worship. And let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, that being y'all, not just singular. Yes. I've thought of it very personally before of like, okay, I need to let the word of Christ dwell richly in me, but then understanding that as a gathered expression. And then, I could just start to catch some vision for like, oh man, what would it be like if whenever our people are together, like they're singing to one another, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, they're teaching and admonishing one another, not just that you're standing on the stage teaching and admonishing them, but they're walking up to one another and saying like, man, you would not believe what I was learning in God's word this weekend. And I can just catch a vision for that. And it's like, that excites me.
Yes. To have people teaching and singing and sharing that, taking ownership of when we come together, we are worshiping God and serving each other as we do that. And to build on your highlight, I think my favorite part was that about the time I finished preaching the second weekend, we'd already prepped week 3 and 4 because we prepped 2 weeks out, 2 sermons ahead. And when that happened and we finished 2, I thought, I don't know. The worship panel was awesome. I mean, how do we build on that? Like this is going to be
save that for the end.
Exactly. And just to see what God did in weeks 3 and 4 and just continued to build in our people's experience and our people's lives was really, really encouraging to me. Hey, let's tell a few stories.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's talk about some things that we heard. You and I got a text from Jake about the lingual small group. Jump in and share that one.
Yeah, I thought that was fun. So that was after the Friday night worship panel. Jake Lingle mentioned that his small group, just some of the ladies there had been on Friday night and just absolutely loved it. Yeah. And so he was sharing like a group text that was going on that someone was asking like, hey, were any of the rest of you guys there tonight? And they're like, no, I wasn't. And then this one lady said, man, you got to go on Sunday. I'm thinking about going back. Yeah. Like I want to experience that again. It's just so fun.
Can I go twice this weekend?
Yes, I think that's okay.
Yes, it is. There was a gentleman about my age that shared with me how his worship experience in that month came alive, where he found himself intentionally, physically, actively engaging in worship. And he crossed that line from, hey, what am I going to get out of it? To I came to give my worship to God. And had a young lady share with me, she's relatively new to our church, and talked about how she'd gotten acclimated. Like it takes a while when you're at a new church. And then having gotten acclimated, she described how it was the very first time she'd ever sensed the Spirit of God leading her in public worship. That I was so excited for her.
Yeah, we had a young man sharing that his parents had been for some period of time, like rather a little bit disengaged, kind of sitting on the sidelines. Yeah. And during this series, it's been something that's like absolutely drawn them in, where like now Jesus has become more central to their walk. And I just love that because that's what we want. We want it to be part of our daily rhythms that we're engaged with God.
Yes. Several prayer team members shared with me about how during this series they had more actively engaged, had more opportunity to actively engage, not just after the service during response time, but with people prior to, and to see people showing up to worship and engaging in prayer and prayer team ministry being involved in their lives. That was another really good one.
So good. So good. So how about for you personally? Like what's this month of worship meant for you?
Oh, such a great question. I knew it, but I didn't realize what a big deal for me in my private worship creation is.
Mm-hmm.
I was blown away. And part of it was setting aside a daily time with God that was first in my day, early in my day, and then how beneficial it is for me to be in creation. Many times there was a sunrise that was especially meaningful to me, having had my time with God. And for me, I've known that in the past, and it was accentuated. I was reminded of how helpful it is to me to be engaged in worship. And I'm so biased to that. I kind of think it should be true for everybody.
Right.
And then we did a survey with our staff, and we used the Sacred Pathways, the tool that we made available. And I mean, if I'm being vulnerable, I really thought 80% of our staff would say they are also engaged in worship by the Sacred Pathway of creation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Like not at all. It was just equal distribution over all of these pathways that God uses in us. So
Super cool.
It was both really invigorating for me, and it was also really inspiring to me to see the diversity of God's people.
Yeah.
That is always such a great reminder for me. How about for you?
Yeah. So the first big thing for me was just that, like, I realized that my daily time with God historically has been read the Bible and pray. And I didn't have really like a moment of worship that kicked it off. And so like
good.
even my prayers were typically geared toward like, I'm starting to think about my day and everything and praying about those meetings. And so just the very act of like shutting off my alarm, rolling out of bed and hitting my knees first thing and like engaging in worship, that was like a big deal for me. And it just like really oriented my life toward who God is first, rather than like reading and then praying about my day. And so that was a big one for me. And then secondarily, like on the Sacred Pathway thing, I'm like more in the intellectual realm. Like I'm most inspired to worship by things I learn about God or his attributes. That's what kind of stirs me up. And so having even that on those flashcards, the God is good, he's great, he's glorious and gracious, and having those as kind of like hooks for some of his attributes to say the way that those things, like the reasons God is worthy of worship, those are helpful for me.
Oh, so good. You inspired me one week when you shared coming back from your Verge group, how you had said, hey, guys, I want you to hold me accountable to not hit the snooze button. Because when you hit the snooze button, you're kind of saying, flesh, you win. But when you roll right out of bed onto your knees, you're saying, I give my life to Jesus today. Really appreciated you sharing that with me personally. That was inspiring.
It was a convicting moment for me. So I'm glad it was helpful for you.
It was. So let's wrap this discussion up. Here's what I'm most excited about. And Nathan, I think you were the one who said it. What I'm most excited about is that this is not going to be a series that a year from now, 2 years from now, we all say, oh, remember October of 23?
That was my best worship ever.
Yes. Can we do that again, please? Like that's not what we're doing here. It's not, okay, that was awesome. Now we're done with worship. Instead, we are creating a rule of life. We are creating a journey that we take together where worship becomes part of our day.
Part of who we are,
every week. This is our guiding rule of life. This is how we are engaging the lifestyle of Jesus. We are actually following in his footsteps. So I'm excited as we begin to put pieces together, and you and I are working it on some pieces that we really believe will be tools to help people remember. And even talking about stacking, as you just talked about, hey, I was reading my Bible, I was praying, but I didn't have worship built into that daily time with God. And we're already working on ways to better communicate and better help our people stack habits first of the day. Even seeing some stuff at the middle of our day coming up early next year. What I'm so excited about is that we have introduced a way of life, a rule of life, guiding practices, not to move on from, but to incorporate into our day. It is such a joy to see what God's doing.
I'm excited. I'm excited about where this is going. Yeah, just to think about a real community,
Yes.
shaped by a rule of life, not
Yes.
just a group of people gathering at 2705 Walton Way on Sundays, but a genuine community shaped by this rule of life, this lifestyle of Jesus.
Yes.
I'm excited.
We are people of worship.
Yeah.
Let the journey begin.